Hi, my name's Scott Nickell. I'm the teaching pastor at Flatirons Community Church in Boulder, Colorado. And what I want to talk about today is simply Jesus. And if you're kind of rolling your eyes right now going, I don't know if I want to listen to that, that's precisely why I want to talk about Jesus. Somehow in the church world, we've lost sight of the fact that it's only about Jesus and should always be about Jesus and no one else. But I guess the fundamental question comes down to, especially in our culture, which Jesus am I talking about? Because every one of us has a tendency to have our own personal Jesus, right? We conform him to our image instead of the other way around. I mean, Jesus is the most popular person in history. He's been written about more than anybody else on the planet by far. If you Google him, you're going to get billions of hits. There's been more representations of Jesus in art than any other person by far on the planet. He has reoccurring roles in popular television shows like The Simpsons and South Park, even as we speak. We wear him on our t-shirts as our homeboy. We have bobbleheads and pencil toppers and playing cards and everything that you can imagine. And I think it's precisely because of our presumed familiarity with Jesus that we fail to take him seriously. And that's not just our culture. In other words, people out there outside the church or the proverbial they. I'm talking about us. I'm talking about specifically us as leaders within the church. I think we get all caught up in systems and methodology and best practices, and we forget about Jesus. And oftentimes I think we, more than anyone else, are maybe more guilty of stealing Jesus' identity than anyone else on the planet. If we're supposed to represent him, sometimes we do the worst job of it. Oftentimes I think we paint false portraits of who Jesus is. Oftentimes in the church world, we paint a picture of Jesus sometimes of being very legalistic. If learning who Jesus is comes through watching us, people would have to conclude that Jesus must care most of all about rules and which ones you're breaking, and Jesus most of the time is probably frowning at you because you break so many rules, and Jesus probably, if he was standing in front of you today, would just condemn you and tell you all the things you did wrong, which is not an accurate portrait of Jesus. The other side we tend to err on is just this permissive form of Jesus that just kind of winks at all your sin and pretends like he doesn't see them and just kind of welcomes you as if that sin wasn't destructive in your life. In other words, we tend to err on the sides of either grace or truth. But the Bible I read, the gospel I read, says Jesus came from the Father full of grace and truth. It wasn't grace or truth. When I see Jesus interacting with people in the Gospels, like the woman at the well, I see him lead with grace, blows away all her preconceived notions and assumptions of how he should interact with her, and accepts her and actually spends time with her and validates her as a human being, but will not disregard her sin. In what would seem like a very insensitive way in our therapeutic culture, he calls attention to the destructive forces of sin in her life and basically just says, how's that working out for you? And somehow this woman, in the midst of being confronted with grace and truth, is an instrument of God to change her town. See, I think we as followers of Jesus, and specifically as leaders within the church, have a very high responsibility to represent Jesus both in purpose and personality as best we can through how we love people, but at the same time refuse to pull any punches in regards to what the Bible actually says. Because if we really believe that sin destroys people, then the most loving thing we would do is to, like Jesus, gracefully point out the destructive forces of sin in their life and offer a new way, as we find in the Bible. So I guess maybe the question I would want to leave you with is simply this: is the Jesus that you talk about, hopefully every weekend at your church, does he look more like you and everyone else who goes to your church, or are you and everyone who goes to your church starting to look more like him? And I think that's the question.